In this video, I'll be taking you through all the workings of a community. Now, a community, you should remember, is going to be a subset of an ecosystem. We say that the Earth as a whole is going to be called the biosphere. Within the biosphere, there are different regions of the Earth that we call biomes, and each of those are going to be different from each other based on how much precipitation, how much light, and some other geographic factors that impact the types of things that live there. Within the biome, we have an ecosystem, which is going to be made up of all of the living and non-living things in a region. And then as we get to a community is going to be focused in on all of the populations, all of the living things within a continuous area. And so there's some important properties that we can identify as we look at the interaction between all those living things in a community. Now, an important piece of background information that you would get from chemistry and from physics are two important laws of conservation. And life has to adhere to these laws because these govern the known universe. First, the law of conservation of energy. We apply that to a biological system because energy cannot be created or destroyed. So living things which need energy cannot create energy. Plants do not create energy. They simply are harnessing the energy that's present in the sunlight and converting that into chemical energy. So all ecosystems, and thus all communities, need an input of energy that comes in from the outside. Matter is going to be cycled through ecosystems. Matter is also conserved, so we don't see atoms being created or destroyed, but they do change from one form to another. And so all of the nutrients, all the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the oxygen, those elements are going to be cycled, and those cycles are things that we'll actually cover in more detail later on in the year. But do remember that each of these two laws are going to be dealt with in a different way by communities because we need a constant input, as you see in the image here, of sunlight coming in. That's our source of energy, but all of the matter, that is going to move through from one trophic level, from one organism to another, and ultimately recycled and reused again and again. Now, we can classify all living things in one of three types. We have producers. Producers are primarily responsible for the energy transfer of turning light energy into chemical energy. Decomposers are also crucial because they are the ones that take that matter and break it down into forms that can be reused by the producers and re-entered back into those nutrient cycles. Now, consumers are ones that generally are eating the producers, and in an ecosystem, consumers aren't really necessary because the producers and decomposers, those are the ones that are really going to accomplish the bulk of the work in terms of processing matter and energy. Now this list is going to summarize all the different types of species interactions that are possible within an ecosystem. A few of these I'll touch on in more detail, and a few of them I won't. But feel free to read through each of those descriptions there, and you'll find similar descriptions in your text. An important one are decomposers. Decomposers are going to obtain both energy and nutrients from the waste products or the dead bodies of other organisms. Decomposers are going to feed off of all types of living things. So decomposers will break down plants, fungus, decomposers will break down other decomposers, and obviously they'll also decompose animals. And these guys are critical in nutrient cycling. Now there are two main types. They're going to be the saprotrophs, which are going to be more plentiful in number but smaller in size. Saprotrophs use external digestion. So in terms of being able to eat, they're going to excrete enzymes that are going to chemically break down the matter that's left over from something that's dead, and then absorb those nutrients internally and use those nutrients as a source of energy. So fungus and the bacteria, and this is a microscopic image of bacteria, those are going to be examples of types of saprotrophs. Now, accomplishing the same role, but in a different way, are going to be detrivores. Now, detrivores utilize internal digestion. And so insects are going to be a major example, and a very important example, of detrivores in our environment. So internal digestion means that they are eating. They have mouths and some type of internal digestive system. So earthworms, insects, pictured here the dung beetle. Again, these things are consuming internally the waste or pieces of dead bodies of things that have already died. In both cases, they're going to then excrete some leftover nutrients that can become the major components of soil, which will then be absorbed by plants to re-enter back into the community. Now, as we characterize communities, there's a relationship. An important characteristic is diversity, because greater diversity is going to be beneficial to a community. And before we can talk much about diversity, which I'll touch on at the end, it's good to take a look at trophic structure. And so this part is really key, and you should look back at your unit standards to make sure you understand which aspects of trophic structure you're required to know. So the trophic structure is the feeding relationship within a community. It's a way to be able to organize all of the species within that community based on what eats what. Now, the simplest way to be able to represent that is a food chain. Now, food chains are going to be sequential. It starts with a producer, which is going to be at the bottom, and then arrows point in the direction in which energy moves through that food chain. So we can see that here, if we use the terrestrial example on the left, we start with the plant, which is classified as a producer because it is undergoing photosynthesis and transforming that sun energy into chemical energy. Now, as the herbivore, like the cricket here, comes along and takes nectar from the flower, energy is being transferred from the plant to that herbivore. As that insect is eaten, in this case, by the mouse or the rodent there, then that carnivore is obtaining its energy from the insect. That rodent is then eaten by the snake, so energy is going from the body, from the actual flesh and bones of the rodent to the snake, and from the snake it's transferred ultimately to the hawk, which is here going to be the top predator at the top of the food chain. Now, the terms in the boxes here are the ones that you need to use to be able to classify each rung on that food chain. So at the bottom is the primary producer, primary referring to kind of the first step, and producer being the kind of organism it is. As you move above, those organisms are all classified as consumers because they are obtaining nutrients by eating another organism. So we have primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and quaternary consumer. And so those primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary, those are all based on the language of first, second, third, and fourth. So that's how we determine what trophic level it is going to be classified into based on how many rungs is it away from those producers. Now, food chains aren't realistic because there's always going to be many more organisms that are feeding upon more things, and we're going to have individual organisms that might have many different sources of food. So a food web is a way to organize all of the interconnected relationships within a community. So any one community, we should be able to list every single species living in that community and to be able to connect it back using arrows to the place where it obtains its energy from. Now, please make note of the direction of the arrows. The arrows are starting with the producer. This is a marine ecosystem, so the phytoplankton are going to be photosynthetic, tiny little creatures that live at the surface of the ocean. And the arrows are pointing away because as the copepods eat the phytoplankton, energy is moving into the copepod's body. And as the copepods are eaten by the squids, energy is moving from them into the squids. Now, we can't isolate an individual food chain by tracking backwards towards the phytoplankton, and we can then, as we isolate into a single food chain, we can classify things as a particular trophic level. If I look, for example, at the leopard seal right here in the middle, what trophic level is the leopard seal? Now, it could actually occupy many different types. I could start a food chain at leopard seal, going back to squid, back to copepod, back to phytoplankton. So I would have producer, primary consumer, squids are secondary consumer, and leopard seals are tertiary consumer. Or I can go from leopard seal to fish, to squid, to copepod, to phytoplankton, and classifying in this case, producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and quaternary consumer. So any one species, depending on which food chain you want to look at, may be classified at multiple different trophic levels. And within most communities, because of the complexity involved and the many different things that an individual species might feed upon, that's pretty common to see multiple levels of classifications. So keystone species are going to be those that have an outsized impact on the structure of the community. Now, keystone species are somewhat debatable because we may or may not have evidence to support one species being the most important, and within a community there might be many species that, if you remove them, would cause a pretty massive change in the ecosystem as a whole. But what we can do is look at cases where individual species have changed in number, drastically changed in number, and then how has the community as a whole changed in result. So in this case, if we look at, again, numbers of species, this is going to be a sign of diversity. So those with the C star, in this case, we see that the number of species remains very high. So from 15 to 20 species present over this 10-year period. When our experimental group, when we removed the C star, and so we see how the number of species decreased very rapidly to only 2 or 3 species once that one was gone. And so at this point, if you're then trying to understand why, you would look and see, well, what is, in this case, the C star doing? What species is it feeding upon? What other species are using it as a food source? And why is that this one species is so important? If we look, we have a similar case here with the sea otters. And so we can see that the diversity, as the otter numbers decreases, that ends up causing an increase later on of the sea urchin biomass, which is going to decrease the total amount of kelp. So removing a species here in the middle is going to cause an increase in the number of sea urchins, and if the number of sea urchins increases because they don't have a predator anymore, then the thing that they feed upon, in this case the sea kelp, is going to decrease as all of those sea urchins overcome and overwhelm the population size of the kelp. So as you look at food chains, when you remove one, or if you increase one, you have to look and see above and below how is that going to impact the numbers of things that are above and below it. If you look in this case, we have the killer whale at the top. If I decrease the number of otters, then I'm going to cause a decrease as well in the number of killer whales because they're losing a food source. Now, trophic levels are limited. Food chains have a limited length. And there's a couple reasons why it is that this might be possible. Now, if we look at the energy hypothesis, there's not enough energy to be able to support a large number of links within a food chain, because energy is going to decrease with each level that you move up. There's going to be a smaller population size that can be supported as you go to a greater number of consumers. Now, there's also a dynamic stability hypothesis, and this is that if you have a longer food chain, it's going to be less stable because there are more opportunities for a particular species to increase or decrease in population size in a given season, and every time you have a disruption in one part of the food chain, there's going to be a trickle-down effect on every other part of the food chain. So energy transfer. This is going to explain why it is that there is a decrease in the amount of energy available at each trophic level. Energy transfer is going to be inefficient. As a rough estimate, we're going to say that about 10% of energy in one trophic level is actually transferred to the next trophic level. So if we look at an example, so here's the caterpillar and the tree, the leaves from a tree that it's eating. So out of that plant material that's eaten by the caterpillar, so some of that is not going to be used. So parts of the leaf the caterpillar is going to eat, but never use any of the certain compounds or certain chemicals that are within there, and it's just going to release those as feces. So that is energy that is never assimilated. there's going to be some of that energy that's used for it to grow. So it helps it to be able to get bigger, and that's going to be the part that is going to be available to, say, a bird that might come along and eat the caterpillar. And then another portion of that energy is going to be used for cell respiration. So it's going to be used as energy that is going to help the caterpillar to move, that's going to help the caterpillar to be able to produce heat, and other things that can't be used as food. So out of that original amount of plant material that's eaten, again, only about 10% of that energy actually goes to helping the organism grow. And so there's going to be a very small percentage of energy available for that next trophic level. So that 10% is a very rough estimate. That number could be much higher or lower depending on that particular relationship and how efficiently the energy from the producer is going to be used by the consumer. That same 10% is going to apply then for consumers. So as a predator eats an herbivore, again, a large amount of that is not going to be used. So think about the owl eating the mouse and how that fur and the bones are not going to be digested, and so that's going to be present in the owl pellet or the feces. That's energy that's not used. And then so much of that energy that is brought in doesn't necessarily help the owl to grow more muscles. A lot of it is just used for heat and for other activities during the course of its life. So about 1% of energy available from the sun is used for photosynthesis. That's again a rough estimate. And about 10% of energy is transferred from each trophic level. So if we say that there's a million joules, and joule, capital J, is a unit that represents an amount of energy, that measures an amount of energy. So 1% is used, 10,000 joules are harnessed by a primary producer. Then 10% of that, 1,000 joules, is going to be left for the primary consumers, 100 joules for a secondary consumer, and 10 joules for a tertiary consumer. Now, a couple things are important here. Now, first of all, we see that the size here is roughly getting larger. If you look at a tertiary consumer, those top predators are generally going to be bigger in size than the things that they are eating. And that's going to be just what is necessary because if you're going to hunt, you're generally going to be hunting things that are smaller. So that encourages predators to be big. But secondly, because they're bigger in size and there's less energy available for the trophic level, that's going to control their population size. And so populations are going to be much, much, much smaller as you look at the top levels of the trophic system compared to what is at the bottom. So there's a little bit more in the Prezi, but I will stop there. So feel free again to open this back up and take a look at some of the other parts. If there's anything that you missed or something that you have questions about, please send those along to me.